Before we begin, if you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored 18+ Ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper and more intense versions are waiting for you there. You can find the link in the description and pinned comment. The rain outside the university coffee shop was relentless, tracing long, weeping lines down the glass. Qiao sat in a quiet corner, a cold cup of coffee completely forgotten on the table. He was supposed to be writing his senior thesis on ancient imperial military tactics. Instead, his phone was propped against his laptop, and he was furiously scrolling through the final chapters of a notoriously tragic historical BL web novel. He let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I cannot believe this," he muttered to himself. "Over 200 chapters of build-up, and the author kills off the hostage prince in the first week?" The novel was a sprawling epic about the Northern Yan Empire, but Qiao had only cared about one character, the enemy hostage prince, famously sent as a humiliating peace offering to the Northern Yan's supreme commander, the demon general Lord Wei Wuji. According to the plot, the hostage prince was a vain, tragic cannon fodder character. He was poisoned by jealous court officials merely 3 days after arriving at the general's manor. It was a pathetic, unremarkable death designed only to show how cruel the Northern Yan court was. "And the demon general," Qiao whispered, shaking his head. "They describe him as a literal monster, scarred, brutal, eating raw meat, ridiculous." A sudden crack of thunder shook the cafe windows. The lights flickered. Once, twice. And then, a blinding, white-hot pain pierced straight through Qiao's temples. He didn't even have time to gasp before the world collapsed into absolute, suffocating darkness. When the darkness finally began to lift, it was not replaced by the harsh fluorescent lights of the coffee shop. Instead, the heavy scent of burning sandalwood and damp earth flooded his lungs. His head was pounding to the rhythm of a slow, rhythmic jostling. He was moving. Qiao slowly peeled his eyes open. Heavy, crimson silk curtains swayed around him. He was lying on a plush velvet seat inside a dimly lit, enclosed space. A carriage. No, a palanquin. Outside, he could hear the rhythmic marching of armored boots. Hundreds of them. The metallic clinking of swords and armor plates cut through the sound of pouring rain. "Your Highness," a trembling voice whispered. Qiao flinched, turning his head. A young servant boy, dressed in traditional gray robes, was kneeling on the floor of the palanquin, looking at him with absolute terror. "Your Highness, we have almost reached the border gates," the boy whimpered. "The Northern Yan soldiers, they are waiting to escort us to Lord Wei Wuji's estate." Qiao stopped breathing. His Highness? Northern Yan? Lord Wei Wuji? He looked down at his own hands. They were slender, flawless, pale as moonlight, and currently draped in exquisite, silver-threaded wedding robes. These were not the calloused, ink-stained hands of a broke college student. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked through his chest. He lunged forward, grabbing a small bronze mirror resting on a low wooden table. The face staring back at him was breathtaking. Ethereal, delicate features, eyes like deep obsidian, lips naturally tinted a soft crimson. It was a face that could bring empires to their knees. It was also the exact face described in the novel he had just been reading. He had transmigrated. He was the hostage prince. The beautiful, doomed cannon fodder who was destined to die horribly in exactly 3 days. Qiao dropped the mirror. "Oh, hell no." "Your Highness? Are you unwell?" the servant asked, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I know you would rather die than marry the demon general, but please." "Shut up for a second, let me think," Qiao snapped, though his voice came out as a melodic, breathy tenor. He covered his mouth. "Right. I need to act natural. I am a terrified hostage. I am a delicate flower." In his head, however, he was screaming. 3 days. I have 3 days before someone slips arsenic into my tea. I need a survival plan. I need to avoid the political factions. I need to stay in my room. And most importantly, I need to stay the hell away from the monster general. The palanquin suddenly lurched to a halt. Outside, a voice echoed like a crack of thunder, silencing the rain. "The Supreme Commander has arrived to inspect the tribute." The palanquin doors were abruptly shoved open. Cold wind and rain violently whipped into the cabin. Qiao shrank back against the cushions, his heart hammering against his ribs as he looked up. He expected a monster. He expected a hulking, scarred beast of a man. Instead, a man stepped into the light of the flickering lanterns. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the storm. He wore black iron armor intricately engraved with silver wolves. A heavy black fur cape rested over one shoulder. His face was devastating. Sharp, aristocratic cheekbones, a strong jawline, and a gaze so piercing and cold, it felt like a physical blade against Qiao's skin. Long, raven black hair whipped around his face in the wind. He was not a monster, he was a god of war. Lord Wei Wuji stared down at the trembling prince inside the carriage. His expression was entirely devoid of warmth. Qiao stared back, his mouth slightly parted. He forgot his fear. He forgot the plot. He forgot everything except the immediate, overwhelming realization hitting his brain. Holy shit, Qiao thought loudly in the confines of his own mind. He is gorgeous. Look at those shoulders. He could crush my skull with one hand and I think I would thank him. Outside the carriage, Wei Wuji's eyes suddenly widened by a fraction of a millimeter. The general stiffened, his hand instinctually dropping to the hilt of his sword. He looked around the courtyard, his sharp gaze cutting through the darkness. Qiao quickly lowered his head, trying to look suitably terrified. Don't look at him, Qiao. Act scared. Act like a virgin bride. But damn, that armor is doing incredible things for his chest. Wei Wuji's jaw clenched tight. He looked directly back at Qiao. The general's dark eyes narrowed, a mixture of profound confusion and deep irritation flashing across his perfect features. For the past 10 years, a blood curse placed upon Wei Wuji by a dying enemy sorcerer had plagued him with a terrifying burden. Whenever he was in the presence of those harboring malicious, murderous intent toward him, he could hear their thoughts as painful, echoing whispers. It had kept him alive, but it had made his world a cacophony of hatred and betrayal. But right now, there was no malice, there was no hatred. There was just a very loud, very clear voice in his head, shouting about his chest. Wei Wuji stared at the delicate, trembling prince. The boy looked like a frightened rabbit, biting his lower lip, eyes cast downward in perfect submission. I wonder what he smells like, the voice echoed directly into Wei Wuji's mind. Probably blood and rain, so edgy, so hot. Focus, Qiao, he's going to execute you. Wei Wuji let out a slow, dangerous exhale. His knuckles turned white on the hilt of his sword. Bring him to my estate, the general ordered, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a literal shiver down Qiao's spine. Put him in the northern courtyard. As Wei Wuji turned on his heel and strode away into the storm, he pressed 2 fingers to his temple. He had survived assassins, poison, and entire armies, but he had absolutely no idea how to deal with this. The northern courtyard of the Wei Manor was massive, cold, and utterly terrifying. Shadowy guards stood at every corner, completely silent. To anyone else, it would feel like a prison. To Qiao, it felt like a ticking time bomb. He paced the length of his bedchamber, the heavy silver wedding robes dragging across the dark wooden floor. According to the novel, the Empress Dowager, who feared Wei Wuji's military power, had sent spies within Qiao's own dowry servants. Tonight, one of them was supposed to bring him a bowl of poisoned lotus soup. I just won't eat anything, Qiao thought, chewing on his fingernail. If I don't eat, I don't die. A soft knock echoed at the door. An elderly maid entered, carrying a steaming porcelain bowl on a wooden tray. Your Highness, the kitchens have prepared some lotus soup to warm you after your journey. Qiao froze. There it is. The death soup. He forced a polite smile. Thank you, Auntie. You may leave it on the table. The maid hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The general instructed that you must eat, Your Highness, to keep up your strength. Qiao stared at the bowl. He knew exactly what was in it. He took a deep breath, his mind racing for an excuse. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the bedchamber swung open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Wei Wuji stepped over the threshold. He had removed his heavy armor, now wearing only a dark, silk inner robe that hung loosely against his broad chest, tied at the waist with a thick black sash. His hair was slightly damp, cascading over his shoulders. Qiao's brain immediately short-circuited. Oh no, the wet hair trope. It's not fair. Why is his waist so narrow? How is he so broad? I am going to die, and my last thought is going to be about this man's waistline. Across the room, Wei Wuji paused mid-step. His eye twitched. He shot a piercing glare at the hostage prince, who was currently staring at the floor, looking like the picture of innocent terror. The general turned his cold gaze to the maid, then to the bowl of soup. "Leave us," he commanded. The maid practically fled the room, shutting the heavy doors behind her. Now they were alone. The silence in the room was deafening, save for the sound of the rain beating against the paper windows. Wei Wuji walked slowly toward the table. He looked at the soup, then looked at Chow. "You haven't eaten," Wei Wuji said, his voice low and commanding. Chow swallowed hard. "I am not hungry, General. If I eat that, my organs will melt. Please don't make me eat it. Also, please don't step any closer, because I am extremely weak to men who smell like cedar wood and danger." Wei Wuji's jaw tightened. He picked up the porcelain spoon and stirred the clear liquid. To anyone else, it looked like a perfectly normal bowl of soup, but Wei Wuji was a veteran of the imperial court's endless shadow wars. He lifted the bowl, smelling the faint, bitter undertone of monkshood beneath the sweet lotus. He knew it was poisoned. What he didn't know was why the hostage prince, who was supposedly sent here as a spy to kill him, was so terrified of eating it. Wei Wuji set the bowl down with a sharp clink. "You fear this soup." Chow flinched. "No, General, I simply lack an appetite." "Yes, I fear the soup. It has poison in it. The Empress Dowager wants to frame you for my murder, so the Emperor has an excuse to strip you of your military command." Wei Wuji's eyes widened slightly. He stood perfectly still, his gaze locked onto the beautiful, trembling boy standing before him. The curse, it was allowing him to hear the boy's thoughts. But they weren't malicious. The boy wasn't plotting against him. The boy knew about the Empress Dowager's plot. The boy was trying to save himself, and inadvertently save Wei Wuji from a political trap. For the first time in a decade, someone had walked into Wei Wuji's estate who was not trying to destroy him. Wei Wuji stepped closer. Chow instinctively backed up until his spine hit the wooden bedpost. The general towered over him, easily a head taller, casting a heavy shadow over Chow's delicate frame. Wei Wuji reached out, his large calloused fingers that had ended countless lives, gently tilted Chow's chin upward. Chow's breath hitched. His heart hammered so loudly he was certain the general could hear it. "His hand is so warm. His thumb is right on my jaw. If he strangles me right now, at least it's a cinematic death." Wei Wuji's lips twitched. He almost smiled. "It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. You will not eat anything from this kitchen unless my personal guard brings it to you," Wei Wuji said softly, his thumb brushing lightly against Chow's cheekbone. "Do you understand?" Chow could only nod weakly. "Yes, General." Wei Wuji held his gaze for a moment longer, listening to the chaotic, panicky, entirely inappropriately romantic thoughts echoing in his mind, before he finally stepped back and left the room. When the doors closed, Chow slid down the bedpost until he hit the floor, burying his flushed face in his hands. "I am going to die," he whispered. "I am going to die, because I am going to do something stupid, like ask the scary demon general to hold my hand." And if you are enjoying this forbidden royal tension, remember, the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation is available on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. The link is in the description and pinned comment. The following weeks in the general's manor were nothing like the novel described. Chow had prepared himself for torture, for cold dungeons, for daily humiliation. Instead, he found himself living in bizarre, absolute luxury. His wardrobe was filled with the finest silks. His meals were prepared directly by Wei Wuji's personal military chef, ensuring no poison could ever reach his lips. And strangely, Wei Wuji demanded Chow's presence constantly. When the general read military reports in his study, Chow was ordered to sit nearby and grind ink. When the general practiced his swordsmanship in the morning courtyard, Chow was ordered to sit on the pavilion steps and hold his towel. To the outside world, it looked like the ruthless general was humiliating the fallen hostage prince, treating him like a lowly servant. But the reality was entirely different. Chow was currently sitting in the sunlit study, grinding an ink stick against a stone slab. He was bored out of his mind. He covertly glanced up through his eyelashes at Wei Wuji, who was reading a scroll at his massive oak desk. The sunlight caught the sharp lines of the general's face. He looked regal, untouchable and incredibly focused. He's been staring at that same scroll for 10 minutes, Chow thought, resting his chin on his hand. Does he have a headache? He keeps rubbing his temples. I wonder if it's the old war injury the novel mentioned. I wish I could massage his shoulders. God, those shoulders. Stop it, Qiao. You are a political hostage, not a concubine. Behind the desk, Wei Wuji's hand froze. The brush in his hand hovered over the paper. He did, in fact, have a terrible migraine. The political envoys from the capital had arrived that morning, their minds screaming with deceit, greed, and hidden daggers. The curse always left him in physical agony after dealing with the imperial court. But sitting here in the quiet study with Chow, the pain always faded. Chow's thoughts were a constant stream of strange modern words, bizarre complaints about the lack of soft mattresses, and an unending, embarrassing admiration for Wei Wuji's physical appearance. It was the only peace the general had known in years. Wei Wuji slowly set his brush down. "Come here," he commanded softly. Chow blinked, snapping out of his daydream. He stood up, smoothing down his silk robes, and approached the desk. "Yes, General?" Wei Wuji looked up at him. The darkness in the general's eyes was heavy, ancient, and deeply exhausted. "My head aches. You will massage my temples." Chow froze. "What? Is this a trap? Is he going to accuse me of trying to assassinate him with a pressure point?" Wei Wuji closed his eyes, leaning back in his heavy wooden chair. "It is an order, Prince." Chow swallowed hard. He slowly walked around the desk, stepping into the general's personal space. The scent of sandalwood and cold iron enveloped him. Trembling slightly, Chow raised his hands and pressed his thumbs against Wei Wuji's temples. The general's skin was warm. Beneath his fingers, Chow could feel the tension, the tight coils of muscle in the man's jaw. He began to massage slowly, using gentle, circular motions. "He's so tense," Chow thought softly, his earlier panic melting away into genuine concern. How much weight does he carry alone? Everyone in the capital wants him dead. Everyone here fears him. He's surrounded by soldiers, but he's so lonely. Wei Wuji's breath hitched slightly. The constant drumming pain in his skull vanished, replaced entirely by the soft, warm echo of Qiao's empathy. For a man who had only ever heard people plotting his demise, hearing someone genuinely care for his well-being was a shock that struck deeper than any blade. Without thinking, Wei Wuji raised his hand. His large, rough fingers gently wrapped around Chow's delicate wrist, stopping the massage. Chow gasped softly, his pulse jumping. Wei Wuji opened his eyes. They were no longer cold. They were dark, intense, and burning with an emotion Chow could not name. The general slowly pulled Chow's hand down from his temple, bringing the boy's palm to rest against his own cheek. The room was painfully silent. Chow could feel the slight stubble on the general's jaw. He could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Why is he looking at me like that? Chow's mind raced, completely panicked but utterly captivated. He's looking at me like I'm precious. Wei Wuji's thumb lazily traced the inside of Chow's wrist, feeling the frantic, fluttering pulse there. "You have gentle hands," the general murmured, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Too gentle for a place like this." Before Chow could respond, a sudden, urgent knock shattered the intimate tension. "General!" a soldier shouted from the hallway. "Urgent missive from the capital." Wei Wuji's eyes darkened instantly. The tender moment vanished, replaced by the cold, ruthless commander. He released Qiao's wrist and stood up, his armor clinking softly. "I must go. Stay in your quarters tonight. Lock the doors." Qiao watched him leave, his skin still burning where the general had touched him. That night, the political tension finally snapped. Qiao was reading in his bedchamber by the light of a single candle. The rain had returned, heavier this time, masking the sounds of the courtyard. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the paper window. Qiao's modern instincts might have been dull, but he had read enough novels to know what an assassin's shadow looked like. He threw himself off the bed just as the wooden doors violently splintered inward. 3 men, dressed in entirely black garments, rushed into the room, their curved blades glinting in the dim light. "Kill the hostage," one of them hissed. "Leave the general's dagger as evidence." The Empress Dowager's plot, Qiao realized with absolute horror. They didn't use the poison soup, so now they're doing it the old-fashioned way. Qiao scrambled backward, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the table and throwing it wildly. It hit one of the assassins in the chest, but the man barely flinched. The lead assassin lunged forward, raising his blade. Qiao squeezed his eyes shut, raising his arms in a futile attempt to block the strike. "Wei Wuji," he screamed in his mind. A deafening crash shook the room. Blood splattered against the paper walls. Qiao slowly opened his eyes. The assassin who had been about to kill him was on the floor. Standing above the body was Wei Wuji. The general looked like a demon dragged straight from the depths of the underworld. His dark robes were soaked in rain. His sword was drawn, dripping crimson onto the wooden floorboards. The aura of pure, unadulterated, murderous rage radiating off him was so heavy it made it difficult to breathe. In less than 3 seconds, the remaining 2 assassins were dead. Wei Wuji didn't just kill them, he dismantled them with a cold, terrifying efficiency. The room fell dead silent, save for the sound of the rain and Wei Wuji's heavy breathing. The general turned around. He looked at Qiao, who was sitting on the floor, trembling violently, staring at the blood on the walls. Wei Wuji's sword dropped to the floor with a loud clang. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides and fell to his knees in front of Qiao. His large, blood-stained hands grabbed Qiao's shoulders, pulling the boy fiercely into his chest. "Are you hurt?" Wei Wuji demanded, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of his usual cold composure. "Did they touch you?" Qiao was frozen. He was pressed flush against the general's broad chest, surrounded by the smell of rain, copper, and sandalwood. He could hear Wei Wuji's heart hammering wildly. "He came for me," Qiao thought, his mind completely overwhelmed. "He actually came for me." Wei Wuji pulled back slightly, his dark eyes frantically scanning Qiao's face for injuries. "Answer me, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Qiao whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm okay." Wei Wuji closed his eyes, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. He rested his forehead against Qiao's. It was an incredibly intimate, desperate gesture, because for the first time in his life, Wei Wuji had experienced genuine terror. When he was fighting on the battlefield, surrounded by thousands of enemies, he felt nothing. But running across the courtyard, hearing Qiao's panicked voice echoing in his mind, he had felt a fear so deep it nearly tore him apart. "I won't let them touch you," Wei Wuji whispered into the dark room, his hands sliding down to grip Qiao's waist protectively. "Whoever sent them, I will burn their houses to ash. I will drown them in their own blood." "He's insane," Qiao thought, his heart fluttering uncontrollably. "He's a terrifying, bloodthirsty warlord, and I think I am completely, hopelessly in love with him." Wei Wuji's eyes snapped open. He stared at Qiao, the silence stretched, thick and charged with an electric tension. Qiao blinked, looking at the general's stunned expression. "Why is he looking at me like that? Did I say that out loud?" "No, I definitely didn't open my mouth." Wei Wuji swallowed hard. He looked down at Qiao's lips, then back up to his eyes. The general's thumb gently brushed against Qiao's lower lip. "You?" Wei Wuji started, his voice barely a rough whisper. "You have a very loud mind, Prince Qiao." Qiao froze. His blood turned to ice. "Loud mind? What does he mean, loud mind?" Wei Wuji let out a breathless, beautiful laugh. It was a sound Qiao had never heard before. Deep, rich, and painfully handsome. "I mean," Wei Wuji murmured, leaning in until their lips were barely a breath apart, "that I have heard every single word you have thought since the moment you arrived at my gates." Qiao's entire world crashed. "Wait, everything?" "Everything," Wei Wuji confirmed softly, his eyes dancing with dark amusement. "The thoughts about his waist?" "Yes." "The thoughts about the wet hair?" "Yes." "The time I thought about him pinning me against the—" Wei Wuji suddenly covered Qiao's mouth with his hand, his own ears turning a faint, dusty red. "Yes, that too." Qiao wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He wanted to jump out the window into the rain. He squeezed his eyes shut, humiliated beyond belief. But then, Wei Wuji's hand moved from his mouth, sliding to cup the back of his neck. The general's grip was firm, grounding, and incredibly warm. "Look at me," Wei Wuji commanded softly. Qiao slowly opened his eyes. "My world," Wei Wuji whispered, the amusement fading into a profound, raw vulnerability, "has been a nightmare of voices for 10 years. Every person I meet, I hear their greed, I hear their lies, I hear their blades sharpening in the dark." He leaned closer, his gaze dropping to Qiao's lips again. "But you Your mind is a sanctuary. It is bright and chaotic and beautiful. You are the only person who has ever looked at me and not wished for my death. Qiao's breath hitched. I don't belong in this world, his mind whispered softly, genuinely. I'm not the prince. I'm just a guy who read a book. What if I disappear tomorrow? Wei Wuji's grip tightened on his neck, fierce and possessive. I will not let you disappear, the general vowed, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. Even if the heavens try to take you back to wherever you came from, I will declare war on the gods themselves to keep you here. And then Wei Wuji kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hungry, desperate, and consuming, like a starving man finally finding water. Qiao gasped into the kiss, his hands instinctually flying up to grip the wet, heavy fabric of the general's robes. Wei Wuji groaned softly, pulling Qiao closer, hauling him up into his lap right there on the blood-stained floorboards. His large hands mapped the curve of Qiao's spine, pulling him flush against his chest, devouring his mouth with a slow, sensual rhythm that made Qiao's head spin. Every panicked, chaotic thought in Qiao's mind suddenly went completely blank. There was only the heat of Wei Wuji's mouth, the taste of rain, and the overwhelming, terrifying feeling of falling entirely into this man's gravity. When Wei Wuji finally pulled back, they were both breathless. The general rested his forehead against Qiao's again, his thumb brushing a stray tear from the boy's cheek. Stay with me, Wei Wuji whispered. It wasn't an order, it was a plea. Qiao looked into the eyes of the terrifying demon general, the man who was supposed to be a monster, the man who was supposed to let him die. I'll stay, Qiao thought, letting the words ring out clearly in his mind. I'll stay. Wei Wuji smiled, and the darkness in the room finally seemed to shatter. A month later, the imperial capital received a massive shock. The fearsome supreme commander, Lord Wei Wuji, marched into the imperial court. But he did not come alone. Walking beside him, draped in luxurious black and silver robes that perfectly matched the general's, was the hostage prince. The Empress Dowager watched from behind her bead curtain, her knuckles white with fury. She had expected the prince to be a corpse by now. Instead, he looked radiant, untouchable, and dangerously close to the man who controlled the empire's largest army. During the court banquet that evening, the tension was thick enough to cut with a sword. Nobles whispered behind their fans. Ministers cast nervous glances toward the high table. Qiao sat beside Wei Wuji, sipping on a cup of sweet plum wine. He was trying very hard to act dignified, but the general's hand was currently resting on his thigh, hidden beneath the heavy silk tablecloth, tracing lazy, distracting circles against his skin. You're doing this on purpose, Qiao thought, glaring at his cup. You know exactly what you're doing. Beside him, Wei Wuji's expression remained perfectly cold and impassive as he watched a minister give a speech, but in his mind, Qiao could clearly see the faint curve of his lips. You look beautiful when you are flustered, Wei Wuji's voice suddenly echoed back. Qiao nearly choked on his wine. He stared at Wei Wuji in absolute shock. Wait, I can hear you now? Wei Wuji turned his head slightly, his dark eyes locking onto Qiao's. The bond goes both ways now, my prince, a side effect of how intimately we share our time. Qiao's face flushed a brilliant, violent shade of red. He remembered exactly what had happened in the general's bedchamber the night before. The tangled sheets, the breathless whispers, the feeling of those heavy hands pinning his wrists above his head. Stop it, Qiao screamed internally, burying his face in his hands. Everyone is looking at us. Let them look, Wei Wuji thought fiercely, the possessiveness in his mental voice sending a shiver straight down Qiao's spine. Let them see exactly who you belong to. Let the Empress Dowager know that if she so much as looks at you wrong, I will march my armies through this palace. Qiao lowered his hands, looking up at the terrifying, beautiful man sitting beside him. He saw the genuine, unwavering devotion in the general's dark eyes. He had transmigrated into a tragedy, destined to die as a forgotten pawn. But instead, he had tamed the monster of the north and found a love that transcended time, logic, and worlds. Qiao smiled, reaching under the table to intertwine his fingers with Wei Wuji's. I love you too, you dramatic menace, Qiao thought softly. Wei Wuji's hand tightened around his, strong and unshakable, and for the first time in the history of the Northern Yan Empire, the demon general genuinely smiled in the middle of the imperial court. If you want the next part, the uncensored continuation, and more unlimited 18+ Ancient Royal BL stories, come join Spicy Ancient BL on Patreon. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment.